Well, joining us to review the rest of the legislative session and what bills passed and which ones did not are Dr. Kathryn DePalo, political science professor at Florida International University, and Dr. Foreman, chair of political science at Barry University. Sean and Kathryn, always great to have you with us on the program. We always appreciate your expertise on all of these issues.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
So, Kathryn, let's go ahead and start with you. Kind of give us an idea of how you thought this legislative session panned out. There was a little something for everybody, right? Obviously, Republicans got a lot of what they wanted with a Republican governor, but the Democrats got some things as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this was kind of a feel-good session, and we haven't had a lot of these in recent years. Certainly, Governor DeSantis got many of his priorities passed, the House Speaker, the Senate President, and we'll talk about some of those issues. But even the Democrats, I think, on things like the environment or even on this idea exchange, you know, there was something in collaboration that could happen between the parties as well.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and break down some of the things that passed and did not pass, some of the big issues. Sean, I want to start with you. Let's talk about health care. Here's what passed. Certificate of Need, which removes a requirement that general hospitals have to apply to obtain approval to build or expand. Firefighters provides benefits to firefighters diagnosed with cancer, benefits to their families. And then drug imports allows drugs approved by the FDA to be imported into our state by Canada and other countries. What failed was conversion therapy, and that prohibits the practice of trying to change a person's sexual orientation for somebody who's younger than 18. All right, talk about all of that.
Yeah, well, as Kathryn said, the Democrats got some of what they wanted in the budget this year, but there are a lot of controversial bills that passed that they're not happy with, and they may fight in the courts, and we'll get into some of those. One of the controversies was with health care, and Speaker Jose Oliva's big priority was this certificate of need, as it's called, before you open a new hospital, or in this case, even other medical centers are included. Normally, you would have to do a big, long report showing the necessity for a new facility in that neighborhood or that region. That is eliminated. The idea is that this will bring about greater competition. Competition, it is hoped, will reduce costs to consumers. But it is also a concern that low-income areas may not get the benefit of new facilities being put there because people are going to go where they think they're going to get profits. And so, again, it limits the regulation on the location of new healthcare facilities. And let me mention the importation of drugs from Canada. Yeah. This was a big deal that did pass. The governor signed. However, similar to when Florida voted last year to get off of daylight savings time, it doesn't mean it's just going to happen, because in fact the federal government has to approve, and they haven't done so before for other states except for Vermont. So it's not clear if Donald Trump and the Secretary of Health and Human Services will allow this to go forward. While it sounds good, we might get lower cost prescription drugs through Canada. The problem is they won't be regulated in enforcement to make sure that these are of good quality and to know what's coming into our state. And the other thing is there's not much Florida has more residents than Canada does. Canada doesn't want the shipment of drugs coming to Florida, so they have to work out all these details.
All right. And then also the other thing too, the firefighters. Could we see any other, like, first responders benefiting from that? Because it's benefits to the families of firefighters who die from cancer. Yeah,
this was a big priority of the CFO and of State Senator Anatoly Flores from Miami-Dade. They got this through. See, some local fire departments already provide benefits, medical benefits if you have cancer from on the job. Many others don't. So the argument was, should we allow local counties to make this decision or not? But the state steps in and preempts and says that this should be available for statewide, all firefighters who contract cancer in the line of duty.
Okay. Kathryn, let's tackle education. Here's what passed. The Guardian program, this comes from the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas legislation from last time. It allows trained teachers in certain school districts to volunteer to carry weapons. Vouchers Pass creates a scholarship program for private schools for families of 4 who make about $77,000 or less. And then what failed was spending requires 80% of state education funding to be spent on teacher salaries and bonuses, classroom supplies, technology for students, and tutoring. So tackle some of that for us.
Right. Well, I think the expansion of the guardianship program was a high priority of the Republicans this time around. You know, last year we were right in the middle of the shooting that took place in the middle of the session that really sucked the air out of the room, and they had to do something. And so we saw really amazing, you know, gun control legislation that I don't think we would have seen before. But this expansion of the guardianship program is very controversial. Teachers do this voluntarily. It's 144 hours of training. Ability to carry a concealed weapon. But again, this is voluntary. And a lot of the school boards, including Miami-Dade and Broward, have already said they are not going to join this program. I think only 25 of the 67 school boards have opted in. So we'll see what kind of effect this might actually have. But I think the voucher program as well, this was a huge priority for Governor DeSantis. I think a huge win for Republicans, a huge win for former Governor Jeb Bush, who was on the floor cheering when this passed. This is going to go to the courts, though, and we will see what will happen. In 2006, there was a similar bill that went through the courts that was declared unconstitutional, primarily because of the religious institutions who would gain some of the funding from the public schools. But now we have a conservative court, so really the argument is that there's probably more receptivity to this kind of bill this time around.
Right. And then what didn't pass, what failed, was requiring 80% of state education funding to go to teachers and salaries and bonuses. Talk about why you think that may have failed.
Well, I think, again, you know, it's sort of an interesting philosophy coming out of Tallahassee. On one hand, Republicans who are in the majority say, you know, we want local control to make a lot of these decisions, yet there are some things that they have passed that you know, preempt some of the things local governments have done. So this really, I think, still stays somewhat in the hands of some of the school boards to do things like buildings, or especially down here in South Florida, which may be more of a need in some areas than others. It would really hamstring a lot of the school boards and what they could spend.
They want to have say on what they can do in their district.
Right.
Gotcha. All right, Sean, let's talk about election reform. Here's what passed. Constitutional amendments raises the number of votes required to approve an amendment from 60% to 66 2/3%. And then, of course, Amendment 4 was passed by the voters, allowing felons their rights to vote. But this requires felons to pay restitution, fine, and fees before they can register to vote. What didn't pass was bundling. Prohibits the Constitutional Revision Commission from bundling multiple topics onto an amendment proposal, which is always confounding for many of us voters when there's so many.
Absolutely.
Right. So let's talk about what did pass.
Yeah, so also, again, Democrats are not happy about some of these substantive bills that passed, particularly on education, the guardianship program that's going to expand the potential for for teachers to have guns in certain school districts. They're not happy about the voucher program, which takes some of the money from the education pie and increases it to charter schools and potentially to religious schools. Democrats are not happy about the reform to Amendment 4. They're not happy about the passage of the Sanctuary Cities bill. So there are some lawsuits coming. But the felon restoring the rights to vote, which was approved by voters by 65%.
Yeah.
And now, as was mentioned as well, it's going to require 66 2/3% for future amendments to pass. But this one, it said that people who have served their time in prison and parole and probation would automatically get their rights to vote restored. However, in the implementation of it, there is this issue of if you have fines or court fees that are attached to your period of probation and parole. And so to clarify, the legislature said you must pay those fines and fees first before you can be cleared to vote, although there's a bypass where a judge can waive them for you. So proponents of the amendment—
can't afford it? Then they're saying, oh, you're still keeping my right to vote away from me.
And that's it, is typically people who are in this situation can't afford it. They have a hard time finding employment. So opponents of this bill are calling it a new poll tax. And poll taxes were outlawed, or there's an amendment to the federal constitution that says you can't charge someone to vote. And this is seen ineffective charging them to vote. On the flip side, they're paying off the fines that went ahead that are attached to a conviction they had in the past.
What about the what failed, bundling, prohibiting the Constitutional Revision Commission from bundling?
Yeah, it's funny, when we headed into the session, many people, even Democrats and Republicans, said, boy, that was terrible what they put on the ballot, this bundling of things that didn't really belong together. We've got to fix that. And then that sort of fell by the wayside as they got into more controversial issues. So we will see a Constitutional Revision Commission, or at least it hasn't been eliminated yet. We'll see it in the future, and they'll still continue to bundle unpopular amendments.
Yeah. All right, Kathryn, let's kind of jump on what Sean was talking about regarding the sanctuary cities. That was a big deal. That was passed in the legislative session this time, prohibits local governments from not cooperating with federal officials, requires local law enforcement to hold undocumented workers for at least 48 hours past their detainer sentences, and gives the Florida Attorney General the power to pursue civil action against governments that don't cooperate. Talk about this one.
Right. Well, again, this is another signature policy issue of Governor DeSantis. And when he ran for the governorship, particularly in the primary against Adam Putnam last year, he had all these commercials and his children sort of building walls with Legos
Yes.
and these sorts of things. And really, probably the most closely related to President Trump on this issue is Governor DeSantis. And so, if nothing else, this was one of his big issues. We technically do not have a quote-unquote sanctuary city in Florida, as other cities around the country have sort of declared themselves. So in some ways, this is an issue that didn't need to be addressed in that sense, but the state is taking really the primary role, absolutely, in making sure that Florida doesn't go forward with any.
We all well remember Mayor Jimenez of Miami-Dade County saying we are not a sanctuary city.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of uproar with that, but he wanted to make sure too that he got those transportation dollars from the Trump administration. So we remember that well. All right, we're running out of time here. Kathryn, abortion, it failed. Fetal heartbeat. If a fetal heartbeat is detected, abortion would be illegal. Also parental consent. All of that failed. Talk about that quickly for a moment.
Right. Well, neither of those bills actually made it out of either of the House or Senate committees. And I think the leadership, that wasn't their priority. If you look at some of the priorities of the House Speaker and Senate President Galvano on transportation and a lot of these signature issues that Governor DeSantis wanted, I don't think they wanted to expend the political capital at this point for doing this. But watch next session. I have a feeling it'll get brought up again.
Okay. Sean, before we go, let's talk transportation. We know there was a passage of money for toll roads, but the big one here is the texting and driving. Now they can pull you over for that. It's illegal.
Yeah, and that's the way it is in 44 other states, and that's what we need here, especially in South Florida. I think the issue is when to pull someone over, what is actually texting versus looking at your screen. There's going to be a grace period to get people used to it, but starting July 1st, you can be pulled over for using your phone. You can be fined $30 the first time, $60 afterward, and you can't touch your phone at all in a school zone or construction zone, although that won't go fully into effect until January 1st.
Wow. All right. Thanks to both of you. Always great to have you here. We really appreciate you kind of breaking it all down for us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, and so what is your take on Florida's latest legislative session and this new budget for 2020? We'd love to hear from you. You can always reach us on Facebook or Twitter @YourSouthFL. While you're there, you can always catch up on your previous segments and episodes and stay up to date with the very latest news and community events happening right here in South Florida.